Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Kai, and before I get into today's case, I do have a couple reminders. Please remember that this video is for entertainment purposes only. I'm just a local girl trying to raise awareness, trying to give victims a voice. So please guys, don't come for me, don't copyright drop me. And secondly, please be kind in your comments. All I ask is that you be mindful and considerate. Alright, let's talk about today's case. So today, we're talking about a young woman named Evelyn Luka. Evelyn Luka was born on June 19, 1979 to parents Arthur and Soon Ok Morimoto. And I apologize if I'm saying the mother's name incorrect, but her parents were Arthur and Soon Ok Morimoto. She has two brothers, James and Jonathan Morimoto, and a grandma, Mildred Morimoto. When Evelyn was just 15 years old, she meets a man by the name of Kevin Luka, who at the time was 21 years old. The two began to date, and shortly after she graduated from high school, they get married. After they get married, they move to Virginia because Kevin's stationed there in the military. I believe it was the U.S. Air Force. So while they're in Virginia, Kevin is deployed overseas twice. And on Kevin's second deployment, this is when allegedly Evelyn begins to go out at night. And when Kevin comes back from his second deployment, allegedly, Evelyn continues to go out at night, and oftentimes Kevin doesn't even know where she is. In July of 1999, Kevin has leave for the military, so he and Evelyn come back to Hawaii. While they're here in Hawaii, Evelyn stays at Grandma Mildred's house without Kevin, and I can only suggest that maybe Kevin stayed with his parents. And I know what some of you guys are wondering, like, why are they staying in separate houses? Aren't they married? What's going on? Well, first of all, we don't know what their relationship or their situation was like at that time, but this is what happened. So while they're in Hawaii, Evelyn continues to go out at night, and Grandma Mildred said, you know, sometimes she doesn't come home until the next morning. Well, if some of you were around back in 1999 and going clubbing, I know I was, my girlfriends and I would go out about, 10 or 11 p.m. And a lot of the clubs in Honolulu close at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., or there's some karaoke bars that stay open 24 hours. And I know for us, after the clubs would close at 4 a.m., we would either go to a karaoke bar or go eat at Zippy's or Like Like. So it's not uncommon to come home the next morning. But I get it. Mildred was young, and, grandmas are going to worry. So that was the situation. And at one point, Evelyn moves out of Grandma Mildred's house, and no one knows where she's living. So a few weeks pass, and Kevin's leave with the military is over, so he goes back to Virginia while Evelyn decides to stay in Hawaii. A month later, so in August 1999, Kevin comes back to Hawaii, and he and Evelyn end up staying with his parents. So now this is good, right? They're together again, they're staying under one roof. Now on Saturday, September 4th, 1999, Evelyn wants to take Kevin out. So Evelyn says, and I'm paraphrasing, Evelyn says, let's go to Venus nightclub. So the two go to Venus nightclub. And for those of you around at that time, Venus nightclub is on Kapiolani Boulevard. And then the other side of the club is the backside of Ala Moana Shopping Center, like that little street in the back. So they go to Venus nightclub, and after being in there for 15 minutes, Kevin realizes that, he's not enjoying it, he's not having fun, and Kevin claims this is because the clientele this particular night catered to homosexuals. And if you guys remember, certain nights of the week, Venus nightclub would hold like a drag show. So Kevin's not having fun, so he tells Evelyn, I'm gonna go sit outside, can you come out at midnight, and then, let's go home. So Evelyn says, yeah, sure. So midnight rolls around, and Evelyn goes outside to find Kevin, and Evelyn wants to stay longer. But Kevin reminds her of their agreement about going home at midnight. So Evelyn says, yeah, you're right. And so the both of them go home at midnight. So now this is September 4th midnight, and they're flowing over into the next morning, right? So September 5th, early morning. Evelyn and Kevin decide to talk about their relationship, their marriage, and in particular, their conflicting lifestyles. right? So Evelyn at this time, she wants to go out at night. She wants to go clubbing. This is what she enjoys doing. And Kevin feels that Evelyn's actions and behavior is conducive with his military lifestyle. He doesn't approve of it, you know. They want opposite things at this point. So eventually they agree to separate. And they say, okay, you know what, we're going to separate, and in a couple years, let's come back together and see if we can reconcile. So that was the plan, and and they were comfortable with that plan. So September 5th, 1999, so later that night, Evelyn wants to go back to Venus nightclub, but Kevin doesn't want to go. But Kevin says, hey, I'll drop you off, and around midnight, give me a call if you need a ride home. If you need me to come pick you up, give me a call. Call me at midnight. So Evelyn says, yes, she agrees. And so before Kevin takes Evelyn to Venus, they engage in relations, okay? And they engage in relations, and Kevin uses protection. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm telling you this piece of information. It is important, and you'll see why later in the video. So they have relations, and Evelyn gets dressed. Evelyn is wearing like kind of a loose dark pants to the point where it kind of shows her underwear in the back, and a maroon sleeveless shirt, okay? Kevin drops Evelyn off at Venus around 9:30 p.m. that night. While at Venus, some of the employees say they remember seeing Evelyn, and they know Evelyn because she was a regular at the club, and particularly in the summer of 1999. And they remember Evelyn wearing like a dark pants with like a purple or maroon top. One of the employees there, Reed Takara, remembers seeing Evelyn because he bought her food. And Evelyn had said to Reed, I have a curfew at midnight. And so, the night goes on, Evelyn's having a great time, she's doing her thing. And around midnight, Reed says he sees Evelyn and she seems anxious to get home. So around the same time, Evelyn calls Kevin and says, hey, I'm gonna stay an hour longer. I don't need a ride. I'm getting a ride home from a friend who lives in Salt Lake. So Kevin's like, okay, great. And they hang up. And I'm paraphrasing this part. So they hang up. So Kevin's at home and he's thinking, okay, she's gonna be home around 1:30 a.m. So 1:30 a.m. rolls around and Evelyn's not home. So Kevin, he waits, 2 o'clock comes by, 2:30 rolls around, still no Evelyn. And they don't say in the report, but I'm just assuming that he's calling her phone and she's not answering, or maybe it died, maybe went straight to voicemail. So I'm just suggesting, because I know that's what I would do. So 2:30 rolls around and still Evelyn is not home. So what Kevin does is he calls Venus nightclub. He calls the club and he asks the person who answers the phone to page Evelyn. The person who answers the phone says, look, dude, it's busy, it's slammed, it's 2:30, I'm not gonna do it, and hangs up. And again, for those of you who used to go clubbing, around 2:30 in the clubs that close at 4 a.m., this is like a pump in time, like this is busy, like the show is going off. So they hang up. So Kevin's at home, he's waiting. Now 5 o'clock a.m. rolls around and still no sign of Evelyn. So what Kevin does, he calls the club again, and the person who answers the phone says, look, it's 5 o'clock a.m., the club has been closed for an hour, there's nobody here. So Kevin hangs up the phone and he's super worried, Again, he's trying to call Evelyn and she's not answering, so he's worried. So the next morning at 9 o'clock a.m., again, Evelyn's not home. Kevin hasn't heard from her. She hasn't called him. He can't get a hold of her. So around 9 o'clock a.m., Kevin decides to call Evelyn's grandma, Evelyn's aunt, Evelyn's parents, and then some of Evelyn's friends. Just anybody who Kevin thinks would know where Evelyn is. And nobody knows where she is. Nobody has heard from her. They have no idea. So now this is the morning of September 6, 1999, okay? Around 8 o'clock a.m., so this same morning while Kevin's on the phone calling, friends and family of Evelyn, trying to find out where she is. Around that same time, maybe a little earlier, a Honolulu distributor by the name of Walter Hussey, anyway, Hussey, I'm horrible with names. So this guy, Walter Hussey, he's driving on the Kauka Boulevard on-ramp, getting onto the H2 freeway. And on the corner of his eye, he notices what seems to be a body on the side of the on-ramp. So he's driving, and he looks over and he thinks like, okay, that's kind of odd, like why would somebody just be lying down, early in the morning? So he continues to drive, but then he can't get this picture and situation out of his mind. So later he returns to go back to the on-ramp to see what's going on. And now in the report, it doesn't say how long it took him to go back. I don't know if it was 5 minutes. I don't know if he waited like an hour or 2 hours. But we do know that he turns around to go back and see what was going on. And when he gets to the side of the road with the on-ramp, what he finds is a woman lying face down in the dirt. She's unconscious and she's convulsing. Okay? And he realizes that she has clothes on. She's fully clothed. And, he's just in shock, right? So, like, there's this woman, like, how did she get here? Who is she? And he notices that above the woman's body, like in the dirt, was tire tracks. Okay, so he doesn't touch anything. He doesn't touch the scene. He's just shocked. He doesn't know what to do. The woman is identified as Evelyn Luka. Okay, so at the same time, while Walter is with Evelyn, trying to figure out what to do and what's going on, 2 off-duty Honolulu Police Department police officers are driving by, and they see Walter with this woman. So of course they're like, what is going on? So this is Officer Sharon Walden and Sergeant Deborah Wilson. So they go over to Walter, and when they get there, they see a young woman lying face down in the dirt, unconscious, not moving, but making tremor-like movements. Okay, so convulsing, like her body is jerky. And she has taxed breathing, so very, difficulty breathing. She's struggling, obviously, she's hurt. So the 2 officers, kind of assess the scene, and Officer Walden realizes that Evelyn is wearing, dark work pants that are like super big. I mean, Officer Walden says they were so big to the point that if Evelyn was standing up, they would fall off. And now remember, when Evelyn went to Venus the night before, she had her own pants on, right? It was like dark, loose, pants, and it was like fitting, and then you could kind of see like, her underwear showing a part of it. But Officer Walden said like this pants was huge, like this doesn't belong to her. So Officer Walden also observes that Evelyn was there for quite some time. She was lying in the dirt quite some time. And she says she can tell this because of the movements and the indentation that Evelyn's body made on that space and on the dirt. Both Officer Walden and Sergeant Wilson unsuccessfully try to wake Evelyn up, and they try and do this by talking to her and yelling at her. Okay, yelling. I don't know about yelling. I mean, is that like a HPD tactic? Is that like something you do? I mean, obviously this woman is hurt, and I mean, personally, in my opinion, don't come for me, I wouldn't be yelling at somebody who's, obviously unconscious and just lying there. But I don't know, maybe they were trying to do everything they could to, wake her up. I mean, maybe that was like the goal in mind, is to get this person awake. They're not able to wake her up, okay? Evelyn's taken to Queens Medical Hospital, and she's determined to be in a coma and is placed on life support in the intensive care unit. So as Officer Walden and Sergeant Wilson are leaving the scene, okay, so The ambulance came, they picked Evelyn up. You know, the two officers talked to Walter Hussein, you know, got his statement or whatever. And the two officers are leaving and driving on the freeway. And they notice that there is a man under the Kauka Boulevard overpass standing outside his vehicle looking over in that direction of where Evelyn's body was. And so Officer Walden and Sergeant Wilson think this is odd because from where the man is standing, he wouldn't be able to see Evelyn's body. So they drive back over there. Sorry guys, it's my cat going crazy. So they drive over there, and as they drive over to go, you know, look at this man, he's an African-American man. That's how they described him. An African-American man. As they go over to, you know, kind of go look to see what's going on, the man gets into his vehicle and drives away. So the two officers follow this man and, you know, just kind of take down his license plate number. So back at the hospital, doctors suspect sexual abuse. So they bring in an expert to examine Evelyn's body. And the expert finds that there's no scarring, bruising, or discoloration to Evelyn's front private area, but they do find that there's bruising on her arms, her legs, her knees, her hands, and her buttocks. So she was severely, severely beaten, okay? Evelyn was taken off of life support on September 28th, 1999, and Evelyn passed away on October 2nd, 1999. An autopsy was performed by the medical examiner's office, and the results came back that Evelyn died of this. I'm sorry, again, I'm terrible with names. Anoxic. I'm just gonna put it here so I don't have to say it. But basically it's brain damage due to ligature strangulation. So being strangled by a long object across of her neck. And in my opinion, again, I'm not a medical examiner, but I think she was strangled, and so she lost a lot of air to her brain. So that's why she ended up in the coma and stuff. But the autopsy results come out with that. She doesn't have any injuries to her back or front private areas. But again, she did have the severe bruising. So now I have questions, now I'm like wondering what went on, because remember guys, when she was found at the scene, she had on those big work pants that obviously didn't belong to her, okay? And she didn't have underwear under those pants. Now she went to the club with her own underwear and pants, and then she's found with these big gigantic work pants that obviously don't belong to her. She doesn't have any scarring, bruising, or discoloration to her front and back private areas, but obviously she's been beaten. So my question is, whoever did this to her, her abuser, was it consensual? Like, was the act consensual, and then he decided to beat and strangle her? I mean, what is the whole point or purpose? Or, and this is dark guys, and yes, I'm gonna go there, did he beat her and strangle her and then have his way with her, when she couldn't move, and that's why there's no scarring or bruising or discoloration? I don't know guys, I'm just like, my mind tries to think of all the possible ways of like what happened, and obviously the only two people that know what happened is Evelyn and her abuser. On September 6, 1999, the case is classified as an assault, because remember, on September 6, 1999, this is when Evelyn is found on the side of the on-ramp, and she is still alive, okay? So it's considered an assault case, and HPD Detective Alexander Garcia is assigned to the investigation. So Detective Garcia, what he does is he goes and talks to those two officers, the off-duty officers, Officer Walden and Sergeant Wilson. So he talks to them, he reads their reports, and then he tracks down that man. Remember that man, that African-American man that was standing outside his vehicle under the overpass looking at Evelyn's body? So he tracks down that man, and the man tells him, and I don't know the man's name, but the man tells him that he was standing there because he thought the body found might have been a missing child of a relative, of one of his relatives or a friend. I think that answer is kind of odd. I mean, I don't know if he was just being ni'ele and you know, standing there, because a lot of Hawaii people, that's what we do, right? We rubberneck and we ni'ele. But that's what he said. He wanted to see if the body was of a missing child of a friend of his or a relative of his. Nevertheless, Detective Alexander Garcia eliminates him as a suspect for this case. So Detective Garcia interviews Kevin, Evelyn's parents, and the valet at Venus nightclub. And based on the interviews with the valets, Garcia generates a list of green 1997 and 1998 Nissan Pathfinders. He wasn't able to find a Pathfinder matching the description, and he didn't search for earlier models because one of the valets indicated that the vehicle was like of a late model Pathfinder. On September 10, 1999, Crime Stoppers released a sketch, and I'll put it up here, of a suspect in the case, which at this time was still classified as an assault. So on September 10th, and this is because Evelyn at the time was still alive, right? She's still in the hospital in a coma on life support. So in response to the Crime Stoppers bulletin, a man by the name of Michael Vargo contacts the police and says he knows a person fitting the description as the suspect. And he describes the man as a black, African-American male in his 30s, 185 pounds, 5'10", average build, clean cut. Well, this is the description that's in the Crime Stoppers bulletin. So Michael Vargo says, hey, I know somebody that fits the description. He drives a green Nissan Pathfinder and he works on Wheeler Air Force Base. And he says this man's name is Deshaun Dubois. Again, I'm terrible with names, so I'm just gonna put it up here. His name is Deshaun Dubois, so I know who this guy's is, and he provides a license plate number, okay, to the guy's Nissan Pathfinder. Now, I got questions again. How does Vargo know this Deshaun Dubois? I mean, is Vargo a guard at the base? So did he, does he see this guy come in often with the Nissan Pathfinder, and that's why he has his license plate number? I don't know the details, but this is what, Vargo says. When Evelyn passes away in October of 1999, the case is then classified as a homicide, okay? And so the case gets transferred to Detective Alan Castro. So Alan Castro takes over the investigation, and Detective Garcia tells Detective Castro that Michael Vargo's information, didn't really lead to anything. And Detective Castro doesn't know who Deshaun Dubois is. He doesn't follow up on Michael Vargo's information. And this is because Detective Garcia's report did not include anything to do with Michael Vargo, what he said, and Deshaun Dubois. So Detective Castro doesn't even follow up. He has no idea basically about that information. And again, I'm gonna have questions like, why didn't Detective Garcia include the information about what Michael Vargo said about Deshaun Dubois in his report? I mean, was it not of importance? Okay, in my opinion, until a case is solved, every little piece of information is important. And because you never know if there's gonna be a connection later. You know what I mean? I think I just personally, again, in my opinion, don't come for me, it's like these little clues and stuff, and you take, and you just never know if and when you're gonna need this information. But anyways, this is what happened. So as far as Michael Vargo and Deshaun Dubois go, at this point, Detective Castro does not follow up, okay? So Detective Castro goes and re-interviews the two valets at the club that night. The two valets were Justin Henson and Jason Caldera. So Detective Castro re-interviews the two valets at the club again. And these two valets were Justin Henson and Jason Caldera, whose initial take on the suspect was used on the Crime Stoppers bulletin, Okay, Justin Henson is the owner of the valet service at Venus nightclub, and he says that he saw Evelyn being dropped off that night between 9 and 9:30. He says he knows Evelyn as a regular, patron at Venus, especially in the summer of 1999, and he says he saw Evelyn leave the club that night with an African American male, about in his 30s or older, medium built, about 5'10" to 6 feet, and about 185 to 200 pounds. And he says that the man was wearing dark dress slacks, a dress shirt, and dress shoes. Okay, that's very vague. And he says he saw the man arrive that night at the club around 8 or 8:30 that night. When Evelyn left Venus that night with the man around midnight, Henson says Evelyn gave him the man's vehicle claim check. So like, when you go and you go collect your car from the valet, right? There's that little check. So Justin says that Evelyn is the one that gave him the man's vehicle claim check. And the man's vehicle was like a dark colored Nissan Pathfinder that had Hawaii license plates, and then had like a tow hitch on the back, which was like about 8 to 12 inches. And Justin remembers this being, something that stuck out in his mind, because he remembers thinking that Nissan Pathfinders didn't normally come with a tow hitch. So he thought that this tow hitch was like an aftermarket type. When asked of the color of the car of the Nissan Pathfinder, he said he wasn't sure because the lighting in the parking lot was like neon and fluorescent. And again, if you've been to Venus in 1999, you'll remember that the lights in the parking lot were terrible. They were like nasty. They weren't really like, bright lights that you could really see the color of a car. But he remembers seeing the man earlier that night on September 5th, 1999, because the man would enter the lot in the wrong way. So like, when you go into Venus, there was like one way you come in and one way, like you could only go in one way and they kind of blocked off the other way. Well, Justin said that he remembers the man coming in from the way that he was not supposed to, right? The do not enter sign. And then Justin says he did not see that man after September 5th, 1999. Jason Caldera worked for Justin Henson's valet service and seen Evelyn 5 or 6 times prior to the night of September 5th, 1999. He said on September 5th, he saw Evelyn leave the club with an African-American man who was about 6'1" to 6'2", 175 to 180 pounds, late 20s to mid 30s, with very short, less than a quarter-inch hair. Okay, he said that the man was wearing khaki pants, a V-neck shirt, and I don't know about the shoes. I don't think he said anything. But this is odd that, okay, Justin said the guy was wearing like dark dress pants, a dress shirt, and dress shoes, which again is very basic. And I think men had a dress code back then for Venus nightclub. So again, that's basic. So I don't know if, who really saw what he wore, because Jason's saying that the guy was wearing khaki pants and a V-neck shirt. That seems like more specific. Anyway, he saw Evelyn get into the passenger side of the man's vehicle, which he said was a very dark green Nissan Pathfinder. Justin said he heard Evelyn and the man talking, to which Evelyn said, and I quote, "You cannot fall in love with someone the first time you meet them," end quote. To which the man responds, quote, "Yes, you can," end quote. Justin says he remembers the man in the car because the man would come to Venus before the night of September 5th, and again would enter the parking lot from the wrong direction every time. Okay, so listening to Jason and Justin's description of the man, right? They described him wearing different clothes. So I don't know about that, because the fact that they paid attention to the man's clothes is like shocking to me, because first of all, I didn't know guys did that, and the description is different, so I don't know how well I believe that. The description of how the man looks, black, African American, the age, the weight, that seems all pretty similar. And then the fact that the man would enter the parking lot in the wrong way, okay, so that matches up. So there's some similarities. I mean, there's a lot of similarities in their stories. So almost 2 years after the incident, Detective Castro has no new leads on the case, and the case goes dry, okay? So Castro retires from the police department in August 31st, 2001, okay? Couple years go by, and now a new detective by the name of Cheryl Sunia, a homicide investigator, becomes involved with the case on June 1st, 2004. While Detective Sunia is looking over the case and the files, she realizes that no testing was done on the swabs of the initial sexual assault examination. So they didn't do any testing back then on the swabs that were taken from Evelyn. And so Detective Sunia is like, why? You know, why didn't they do any testing? So Detective Sunia asked the police lab to run the tests, and the results come back. They identify a part of a sperm from an unidentified male, okay? The DNA sample was downloaded into the Hawaii State DNA database, okay? So Detective Sunia comes on the case in June of 2004. She's looking over the case and the files. She realizes, hey, there's no testing that was done on the swabs. She tells the police lab, you know, run the tests. I want to know the results. The results come back, and they find that there was a sperm from unidentified male in Evelyn Luka, okay? So then the DNA sample is then downloaded into the Hawaii State DNA database, okay? But there is no match. So the sample's downloaded into the database. This is 2004. Sorry, guys. There is no match. And then the case goes cold until February 2007. So 3 years after Detective Sunia comes on the case. Case is cold, nothing. I mean, can you imagine what the poor family of Evelyn Luka had to go through from 1999 to 2007? Nothing. I mean, that's just heartbreaking. In February 2007, Detective Cheryl Sunia gets information from the DNA database indicating that the DNA sample from the unidentified male, there's a match, okay? So there is a match. The DNA database is periodically checked, you know, and ran and scanned. And in February 2007, there's a match to that unidentified male. And that match belongs to a man named Darnell Griffin. So in 2004, Darnell was asked to provide a DNA blood sample to police, okay? Now I'm gonna talk about Darnell Griffin. Darnell Griffin is originally from Chicago. He joined the Army, and in 1978, he was transferred to Hawaii. Lucky us. While in Hawaii in October of 1979, Darnell is accused of raping a 26-year-old tourist. For some reason, that case is dismissed. I don't know why. They don't say. In October of 1980, Darnell is 22 years old, living in Salt Lake and living with his girlfriend. During this time, he meets a young woman named Lynn Marie Girardi. Gosh, I'm so terrible with names. I'm so sorry. Girardi. I'll just post it up here. Lynn was born in Hibbing, St. Louis County, Minnesota. She lived at 1520 Liho Street in Makiki. She moved to Hawaii and worked as an X-ray technician. And she didn't want to date Darnell because of their different interests and her prejudicial attitude toward him. This didn't sit well with Darnell. I mean, he pursued her and he wanted to date her, or I don't know what he wanted to do, but he had a girlfriend. He was 22 years old and he had a girlfriend, but then he's like harassing this Miss Lynn, okay? 4 witnesses say that Darnell constantly harassed Lynn over the phone, and he would show up at her apartment uninvited and unannounced at least twice. On October 10, 1980, Darnell goes to Lynn's apartment. And 3 days later, Lynn is found strangled and dead in her apartment. And guess who the killer is? Yep, that guy. So, this guy, right? In October of 1979, just 1 year after he comes to Hawaii, because remember, he comes to Hawaii in October 78. In 1978, excuse me. He comes to Hawaii in 1978. In October of 1979, he's accused of raping a 26-year-old tourist. That case is dismissed. And then just a year later, 1980, he murders Lynn Marie Girardi. Miss Lynn Marie, okay? I mean, this guy, and then now his DNA match is connected to Evelyn, Luka, in 1999. I mean, this guy has like a record. It's like disgusting. Marie says that he or she, I don't know, it's an 11-year-old minor, heard crying and screaming and then silent for like 5 or 10 minutes. So the person who lived next to Miss Lynn, this 11-year-old kid, heard her, you know, being murdered. I mean, this is like horrible. Heard her crying for like 5 or 10 minutes and then screaming and then nothing. So guys, I'm gonna say my personal opinion of what I think that crying and screaming was. I think the crying was because he had raped her. He was raping her, so she was crying. And then she was screaming because he was strangling her, and then silence. I mean, I hate to say it, but you know. Obviously, Darnell Griffin is found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Okay, so now Darnell comes out of prison, right? And when he comes out of prison, like a few years later when he's on parole, that is when the police ask him for a DNA sample. So in 2004, he provides a blood DNA sample, and he's not happy about this. I mean, when he's asked to give his DNA sample, Darnell's wife, Nancy, okay, now you gotta fast forward, right? This is like 2004. Nancy, he's remarried now to a Nancy Griffin. Nancy said that he was very, very upset that he had to provide a DNA sample, and he became very defensive. And he was saying, you know, like, why do I have to give a DNA sample? What if I don't give my DNA? What's gonna happen? I mean, somebody who's not guilty and has nothing to hide would give their DNA freely, right? I mean, somebody who's guilty or is planning on doing something in the future, obviously is gonna get defensive about their DNA. I mean, this guy is just unbelievable. I mean, this, in my opinion, this guy is scum. Scum. So during the initial investigation for the DNA in HPD, I'm going back now to Miss Evelyn, okay? During the initial investigation for the DNA, an HPD criminologist tested Evelyn's clothing, her body swabs, and her blood against Kevin's blood. And then Kevin's was eliminated, okay? And then, so now all of Evelyn's, you know, evidence is now being tested against Darnell Griffin's blood, okay? Kevin's excluded as a contributor to the DNA obtained from Evelyn's clothing and her body swabs. But the sperm fraction of Evelyn's swab in her private area included Darnell Griffin's DNA. Okay? I'm going to say that again. They test everything that they've collected from Evelyn against Kevin. Okay? He's excluded. They don't find Kevin's evidence on Evelyn's clothing, her body, you know, her private areas like that. And he's excluded. Okay, now you got to remember that I said that he had used protection, right? So Kevin used protection before he dropped Evelyn off to the club. But then they test all of Evelyn's evidence, her body swabs, her clothing against Darnell Griffin. And the sperm fraction of the DNA is matched with Darnell Griffin. So that's that connection. The criminologist said they couldn't determine exactly when that sperm was deposited. It could have been September 4th, September 5th, or September 6th. They don't know. And they said that Evelyn's fingernails, underneath her fingernails, had too little of a sample to be analyzed, because a lot of victims, when they're being harassed and abused, they will sometimes grab onto stuff, you know, like the abuser, or they'll like scrape the abuser or like scratch the abuser. So they'll take what's under the fingernails and analyze it, but the criminologist said that there wasn't really anything under there to be analyzed. Detective Sunil also searches for that Nissan Pathfinder, and she learns that Darnell Griffin owned a 1996 Nissan Pathfinder in 1999. Okay, so flashback real quick. Remember when Detective Garcia came on the case and he talked to the valet guys, and the valet guys said, oh, you know, it was this model of a Pathfinder. So Detective Garcia generated a list of 1997 to 1998 Pathfinders based off of what one of the valet guys had indicated about the year and the model of the Pathfinder. But Detective Sunil learns that the Pathfinder that Darnell owned in 1999 was a 1996, just 1 year off. I mean, I don't want to dog the police department or anything, so, but it just seems like, you know, like, why didn't Detective Garcia like open up his search, like go back 10 years, go back 10 years. I mean, I don't know if they made Pathfinders 10 years that early, but you know, go back farther, not just like 1 or 2 years. I mean, it's just kind of frustrating, like when you hear of all the little things that were missed. Okay, so she finds out that Darnell used to own this 1996 Pathfinder in 1998, but that the Pathfinder was auctioned off to somebody in Maui, and then it changed owners a couple of times. Okay, so now you remember, this was 1999 that Darnell owned this 1996 Pathfinder. It's now 2007. Okay, Detective Sunil finds that match with Darnell in 2007, and now she's gonna go look for that Pathfinder. So, you know, it's been years. So the Pathfinder's on Maui. It changed owners a couple of times. So Detective Sunil goes to Maui in 2007, tracks down the Pathfinder, sees that the Pathfinder is black. The color of the Pathfinder is black, not dark green. And again, you got to remember, the valet guy said that the lighting in the parking lot by Venus nightclub is really bad. So it looked really like a dark green, but it was black. Okay, I mean, that's like an easy mix-up. Again, no, you can't blame them for that. So she flies to Maui, she finds the Pathfinder, and she actually has the Pathfinder sprayed with luminol. And for those of you who do not know what luminol is, it's a chemical used to basically spray it over anywhere you think that you can find blood or bodily fluids. Detective Sunil also says that there's a mounted spare tire in the back of the Nissan Pathfinder and no tow hitch. But then again, you gotta remember, it's 2007. The car has changed owners a bunch of times, you know. People change stuff, take stuff off, put stuff on. You mean, I'm just glad that she found the car. Darnell Griffin is arrested on March 29, 2007. Yay! So in 2009, shortly before the trial begins, Detective Cheryl Sunil locates that Deshaun Dubois. Remember, Deshaun Dubois is the man that Michael Vargo said, identified as in response to the Crime Stoppers Bulletin. So Detective Sunil finds Deshaun Dubois on the mainland, calls him, interviews him, and after interviewing him, says that the only link was that he was an African-American male and used to have a Nissan Pathfinder. But Detective Sunil eliminates him as a suspect. And back in 1999, Dubois was in his early 30s. He had a short, flat top hairstyle, owned a green Sequoia Pathfinder, and lived in Schofield Barracks. Investigators never showed the Venus witnesses a picture of Deshaun Dubois. And when Venus witnesses were shown a photographic lineup, including Darnell Griffin in the lineup, they were unable to identify Darnell Griffin as the suspect. Now I have questions. Like, let's talk about this, okay? Why wasn't Deshaun Dubois' picture shown to the Venus witnesses, okay? That's a question number one. Question number two is, why didn't the Venus witnesses identify Darnell in this photographic lineup? Now, I gotta imagine that the only reason why they weren't able to recognize him, it's because it's been almost 10 years. Now, this is 2009, okay? And this bad thing happened in 1999. So now there's like a huge gap of almost like 10 years. So maybe that's why the Venus witnesses weren't able to identify Darnell. I mean, maybe Darnell's looks changed. Maybe he had hair back then and now he doesn't have hair. I mean, I don't know. It just blows my mind. Griffin's wife, Nancy. Okay, so now you gotta remember, Darnell, I don't know who would marry him, but Griffin's wife, Nancy, spoke to police investigators. She said they got married on July 11th, 1998. So just 1 year before he committed this horrific crime. And again, this guy Darnell just, I mean, every time he commits a crime, he's like, has a girlfriend, now he's married. I mean, what is up with this guy? It's just disgusting. So anyway, Nancy says they get married in 1998, and in 1999, they were living in Salt Lake. So now remember, when Evelyn called her husband, she told him that she was getting a ride home from a friend who lived in Salt Lake. And Darnell Griffin in 1999 lived in Salt Lake. They have 2 children together. Nancy and Darnell have 2 children together. A son born October 24th, 1999, poor guy. And Nancy was more than 7 months pregnant on September 6th. Okay, this is so interesting to me. Nancy was more than 7 months pregnant on September 6, 1999, and her maternity pants were size 10/12. So remember when Evelyn was found on the side of the road wearing those really big pants? Those pants didn't belong to her. They were huge. They would have fallen off of her. Remember, Evelyn was like 5'6", 130 pounds, you know, not a big girl. So she's got to be wearing like size 5, size 5'7", not 10 or 12. So I'm thinking, this is my opinion, you guys let me know what you think. My opinion is that those pants belong to Nancy. I mean, that is just so sick. Like, were they in Darnell's car, his Pathfinder at that time? I mean, it's just so gross. So at the trial, Darnell Griffin does not testify on the stand, but he does admit that he slept with Evelyn. He says that it was consensual. When he gets sentenced, this is what he says, okay? And I'm quoting. To the family, me and my family, you know, have feelings for your family. But you're in error by saying that I did not learn. I did not commit this crime. I wasn't the guy. I wasn't there that night, end quote. But so that's what Darnell says to Evelyn's family. And basically, Evelyn's brother, James Morimoto, says, you know, Darnell's like a waste of space. And Evelyn's brother says, you know, he's for the death penalty. Unfortunately, Hawaii doesn't allow for the death penalty. So Evelyn's parents, and by right, Evelyn's family, and by right, are upset and disgusted. I mean, wouldn't you be? So this guy, Darnell, you know, what frustrates me is that both in the murder of Lynn Marie Garrotti in 1980, and then also the murder of Evelyn Luka in 1999, both times Darnell doesn't admit. He's like in denial. Like, he doesn't admit that he's the one that did it. After he is like definitely caught red-handed, he's the killer, he still says he didn't do it. I mean, this guy is just like something else, right? Anyways, guys, that's all I have for you today. I hope you liked my first video, but I promise I'll keep the videos coming. I have a video next week for you guys. So let me know what you think. Leave your comments, your opinions, your thoughts about this case. I'm just curious to see what you guys say. We all know that Darnell is scum, and luckily he's in prison for life.
I may thank the good Lord for that.
Thanks
right?
for listening. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you next week. Aloha.